Well, it's 1:45 right now, so we'll go ahead and get started. We're here today to talk about leveraging project data in BIMs for efficient building operations and maintenance. This will be about a half an hour session. You guys at 12:15. I'd just like to introduce our presenter today, Walid Thabet. He's the president of Virtual Facilities Consulting. He's PhD and professor at Virginia Tech in the Building Construction Department. He's responsible for identifying VDC and BIM to FM best practices and technology solutions for the AEC industry. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. This is my my first time at this conference, and I've met people I've known from before, and I've met many new people that I've not met before. So it's been great so far, and I'm hoping that I'll continue attending and become some of the veterans that have been here 10 or more years. Welcome, and thank you for taking the time to hear a little bit about what I'm going to say. This really follows the, yes, sir. Is it? I don't know.
I don't hear anything from there on the recording.
I think it's on. What is this pushed up?
It is on. Maybe I need to. Is that better? Okay. This is really a continuation of some of the issues that the keynote speaker during lunch, Chuck, talked about, and so it's interesting because I will try to follow what he said. My presentation kind of covers a lot of the things, the general scope of if you're an owner just thinking about starting this BIM-FM journey, what are some of the things I've learned from working with some owners, including my own university, Virginia Tech, and the facilities department at Virginia Tech. This is a general statement. As an owner, you are at the receiving end of data dump. Every owner knows that. It's a fact, and the amount of data that you receive varies between owners, and the version of the data that you receive also varies depending on what you've required in your contract. I like to think of BIM-FM in many different ways, but I think of it as a process, and a process that doesn't have to happen all at once. So I agree with the prior keynote speaker where he talked about take steps. So I encourage you, if you're sitting here as an owner, have not started that journey, to think about what is the first step I need to take towards completing that journey. And I also want to add that that first step does not need to include BIM. I think the first step really needs to include identifying what the information, what the data that you need is. If you want to do the journey completely at once, that's up to you. But I think from my experience in the last 4 or 5 years working in that area specifically, I think the journey should start in steps, and as an important first step is to identify that data. And parts of the presentation talks about how to identify that data. There are challenges that I've identified, and I summarize them in a few things. There's a large amount of data that we get as an owner at the end of the project. Many owners I've talked to cannot really, they are great facility managers, but here's the challenge that on the receiving end as a designer or as a contractor, I would struggle with owners that cannot articulate what they really want and how they want to present that from a perspective of a BIM deliverable. This is an interesting fact also. Every owner you talk to, they want something different. Some want the whole thing, Some want just the data. Some want the data separate from the BIM. Some want the BIM and the data together. Some want the data in that format. Others use a software different than what contractors and designers use for design and constructability. And so the total picture is not consistent. And people involved in that process need to understand what the owner end need is. And that's usually a challenge. And then the last challenge is that from a designer and contractor perspective, many of those organizations, their current practice doesn't really necessarily respond to this BIM-FM new initiative that has started more than 5 years ago. And finally, when you say BIM to owners, they get scared. Many of owners get scared from the word BIM. One, they don't understand it. Another, they don't understand what it includes. And so I would encourage the owner side to spend some time understanding what BIM is. I also encourage people involved, whether consultants, contractors, or designers, to work with owners to give them the big picture about what BIM does, what it is, and how it's beneficial to their organization. So there are a few questions I will answer in my presentation. Why should my business, from an owner perspective, why should my business engage in a BIM-FM strategy? What data is needed? What format should be used to deliver that data? How is the data captured and transferred to my FM system? And then finally, at the end of that journey, or at the beginning stages of that journey, what would my BIM-FM owner standards look like or include? I will tell you responses to these questions from my experience, both as recently as an owner of a small consulting business, virtual facilities consulting, but I've also been a professor at Virginia Tech for over 20 years in the building construction department, and I've done a lot of research in virtual reality in the early days of the 2000s, and then got involved in BIM when Revit was created, and then got involved more in BIM-FM in the last 6 years. So that's my experience where I'm coming here from. I worked with, I refer to it here as a large facility owner, and that's obviously Virginia Tech. So I worked with them over the last 3 years trying to just define what data is needed for them to eventually prescribe in their standards so that they can operate and maintain their facility. I also work with other owners. I work with a large general contractor in the DC area, Clark Construction Group. So I've looked at a few projects in the last few years as a virtual facility consultant, and that's where my experience comes from. Why should I engage in BIM? I'm going to go through that quickly. I'm going to show you a few graphs that you probably have seen before, so I don't want to spend time on them. 85% of the cost of a facility is operations and maintenance. Surprisingly to me, that more than 50% of that is maintenance. This is a graph from the National Research Council. Many of you have probably seen it. The blue line represent the decline of a facility performance as it ages, and the red line represent if that facility did not receive the proper maintenance. So that's based on data collected by the National Research Council. We would all hope to be, as owners, to be on the continuation of the end of the blue line. If not, we're probably going to end up with our facility aging much faster. Another fact is that facility maintenance is data intensive. We rely as facility managers and owners on data to manage and operate the facility. And so we want that data to be accurate, and you've heard that validation of data a lot during the last 2 days. We want the data to be relevant. I just don't want any data. I want data that I really need to perform facility management. I want it to be complete and not missing information in it. Another graph that you might be familiar with is a sawtooth graph where the these endpoints right here represent the end and the start of different contractual contracts. And so this graph was created to illustrate that as designers identify and collect data, and then they don't pass it properly to the next stakeholder, which would be the contractor, and as the contractor collect more data and don't pass it over to the owner, then there's a loss of time and lost money in that process. And the National Institute of Standards have identified the total loss to be around 23 cents per square foot nationwide. And that comes to about $15.8 billion annually. And this is data back from 2004. So because of all this, owners are starting to pay attention to the BIM-FM process that we've been talking about in the last 6, 7, 8 years. And design and build team are also starting to realize that there is an opportunity here to help owners and to improve that process. Here's an example from the case study I did with Virginia Tech. I sat with Virginia Tech facility staff in 2015, and I asked them, what do you do to collect your data to populate your CMMS? Their CMMS is from AssetWorks, it's AIM. And they said, we review the handover documents, and to my surprise, submittals is not part of that. Facility staff at Virginia Tech did not know what submittals are. They take that data, they try to dig out as much data as they can from plans and other documents submitted. They populate it into a spreadsheet. Then they take the spreadsheet and they do a building walkthrough to validate what they have collected. They edit the spreadsheet with any information that they've gathered from the field from visiting the new building, and then they manually enter that data into AIM. So to me, this looked like a tsunami of information that as an owner, as Virginia Tech, they're faced with at the end of the project. They have to go sit and dig through that tsunami of information, and they identify as much as they can. That's the solid blue dots. Some of the other relevant information are lost, and then some of the irrelevant information has had to be disregarded. These are some of the things that they said they're struggling with. Data is scattered, asset data is incomplete, child parent assets, fans inside air handling units they cannot identify on the plans. Asset naming doesn't follow a standard that they can recognize. Digital O&M manuals are submitted disconnected from drawings and other information, so there's no relationship they can link the two together. So they lose almost 50% of the data information they can't find. They spend about 5 to 10 minutes per asset to populate in that spreadsheet in step 2. It takes them 1 to 2 staff persons per day, per building for 2 days to go do the validation walkthrough. And then it takes them about another 10 to 15 minutes per asset to edit the spreadsheet and enter it in AIM. So that's a lot of time and money spent that they have struggled with over the years. In general, it takes them 6 to 9 months to get their AIM records ready to begin tracking the maintenance and operation of a building. And for Virginia Tech, that's 3 cycles, 3 maintenance cycles. Because much of the data is not found, and they are supposed to rush to get that data extraction early. They have ended up at times with entering wrong data. And so a lot of the data that they entered in the system had mistakes, and that were discovered during the regular maintenance process. So the idea is to make sure that when we implement BIM for FM, that we allow that sawtooth graph into a really solid, straight climbing graph. And I think the way that could happen is by getting the owners to drive the data handover process, to specify clearly how that data handover of the information should be. What data is needed? This is a survey done by Imagine It Technologies in 2015. They asked a group of architect, engineers, contractors, and facility managers to ask them the question, do you know what you want? They asked the owners, do you know what you want? They asked the others, do you know what the owner wants? And the results is that only 27% said we do in our projects. The remaining 73% did not. So owner business practices need to change. They need to work on defining what they want. And I call that, and many have called it a different thing, information specification, data dictionary, data requirement, call it what you want, but the owner really needs to start. And I think this is, if you take a first step towards BIM-FM journey, this is what you need to do, is try to determine what is the information that you need, that you want your project stakeholders to deliver to you. It's a detailed prescriptive description of the needed data. It requires time, and I have a discussion with some of owners I met yesterday. It is important that you get the buy-in from the people, the stakeholders involved with you in the owner organization, the people that they're going to use the data. So that's important. How do I identify the data that I need? Here are some thoughts, ideas, criteria that you can think about and use when you're trying to get together with your staff and determine what are the data that you need. Think about your short-term as well as your long-term goals. With Virginia Tech, we sat down and talked about preventive maintenance. We talked about space planning. We talked about asset management. We talked about energy analysis. Not all of these business functions, they're interested in short-term. But some of them, they were interested in, some of those they were interested in long-term, but they haven't thought about that. And so when we posed that question to them, they started thinking about, okay, what are the asset? I am not doing energy analysis today, but there is an interest for us to do it 5 years from now. I asked them why aren't you doing it today and you want to do it 5 years from now? Well, Virginia Tech has been impacted by state government over the last 15 years. And by showing the state certain statistics on energy analysis, it would actually help Virginia Tech to propose new fiscal budgets 2-3 years in advance. And so that's something they're thinking about to include in their analysis in the future. Our first major business function was preventive maintenance, and that's what we focused on short term. You also want to think about what are the assets, within those business functions that you identify, what are the assets that you're maintaining? Virginia Tech, and I know other universities and other owners, there are certain assets that you service contract out. Some assets you replace, you don't maintain or repair. And then some assets you run maintenance on a yearly basis, right? And so what are the assets that are maintained and managed? Do the assets have significant capital costs? That might be a criteria. Are there regulatory requirements such as health and safety that may require you to include that asset class in your list of required assets? I can't say more about this. This is really important. Get buy-in of the end users. Use alignment meetings. And if you can use an external entity to help you with these alignment meetings, get them involved. Understand the goals and objectives of the end user. The end user is not the facility head, manager or head. The end user is the people involved at the ground level where they go in the field and they go actually do the maintenance of the equipment. Get them involved at some level, because understanding what they want is really key to the success of that process. Types of data, structured versus unstructured. Asset data, space data are critical. Unstructured data, here's what we deal with: PDFs, JPEG, and pictures and all that. These are the main elements of the data that we collected. Different number of asset groups and types. We looked at naming conventions. We looked at what data fields or attributes we need for each class of groups and types, naming requirements, and then milestones of when the data will come and who is responsible to bringing that data. Again, different stakeholders bring you the data at different times if you're gonna require them to do that. We also look at standards. Under asset classes, we looked at omni-class standard and whether we implement that in the process. Under the naming convention of the asset types and classes, we looked at US CAT standard and we adopted that. We looked at 80 asset groups. We had what we called common attributes. These are parameters or properties that are common to any asset class. We also looked at specific attributes. And so for each asset class, there was a list of specific attributes that we identified. This is the tag naming convention that Virginia Tech adopted. And then we summarized everything at the end. And we're gonna package all this and include it as part of the requirements to deliver information. At the beginning stages of the work, we identified 4 milestones for delivering the data: red, orange, green, and blue, and then we cut those milestones into 2. One at submittal approval, and then the other one at end of commissioning. I'm gonna fly through here quickly because of time, and then if you have any questions, I'm happy to talk with you. If you're trying to think about what format, it's either proprietary, owner-defined, or you could go with standard formats like COBie. We looked at COBie and we realized that it's outside our scope, outside our time frame, and so we decided to go with a proprietary format. This is the format that we chose. It's a spreadsheet. It's based on 6 sheets at the bottom: general, attribute, parts, warranty, location served, and classifications. These are all sheets. This is all a structure format based on how Virginia Tech wanted the data built into the spreadsheet so that they can take that spreadsheet and tie it into AIM. How to capture the data, you could do it. Again, as a first step, consider a spreadsheet format. Get your data, get the design build team to give you the correct, complete, validated data in a spreadsheet. There's nothing wrong with that. Then you can go to a BIM model approach. You don't have to jump from 0 to a BIM model approach. You don't. It's advantageous to at least get your data on a piece of paper or in a model. It doesn't matter. There's an advantage of getting that data process completed. If you're going to capture it in Excel, we did it manually. Agile handover, for example, have an application. I put it up here with Jeff. Some automated process where you can electronically capture the data from your documents and dump it into an Excel sheet. Revit has a very structured way to define the data. I looked at it. We explored it. I looked at plug-in tools I want to make you aware of that really would help the process of creating the data into Revit. CTC and ID8 software, they have tools that would allow you to actually manage parameter definition, manage data entry. Very great tools. Moving the data from the spreadsheet to your CMMS on the far right, different ways. If you're going to use a BIM model, there are also different ways of collecting the data. It goes from import-export plugins into model software like Revit, to middleware like Ecodamus, to available vendors today like Archibus and Maximo are creating these quick sending of data from the BIM model directly to the CMMS system. So I'm gonna, we're also exploring Dynamo as part of a research at Virginia Tech. Dynamo is a plugin for Revit, and it's a visual programming language that allows you to grab data in any way, in any form, and send it out to an Excel sheet in any way, in any form. So it's really requires a little bit of light programming, but it's very, very flexible tool to capture data out of Revit. Archibus extension, we played with Navis Tools functions, and there's a Navis Tools data tools piece add-in that I played with that allow you to bring in data into Navis Tools out of Navis Tools. My last question is, what should be included in a BIM FM owner standards? I've looked at many owner standards, specifically campus owners. USC has a great, if you want to look at an example of a campus owner, BIM FM requirements, start with USC. They have a very comprehensive, they did a great job putting together their standards, and obviously since over 10 years ago, they have improved it. They're very prescriptive. They tell you how to do everything and how they want it. I looked at UNC Charlotte. I looked at recently at Ohio State. So there's many examples out there. I suggest and I recommend highly, if you're an owner and you're going to write the standards, don't just post it online for the design build team to read it. Make sure you give some time to sit with your design build team, talk about it, even present the standards. Educate them about what you want and how you want it so that you can reduce the amount of errors that you're going to receive at the end. And then require it from the design build team. Make sure that they include it in their BIM execution plan. That's necessarily, because they're going to move those requirements down to their subcontractors and trades and consultants. Those are the 5 questions I think you should think about as an owner who are about to start this journey. I wish those of you who are starting that journey well, and we hope as a community of designers, builders, and owners that we work together to make that process as standard and easy for everybody in the future. And with that, I thank you.
We've got a couple minutes for questions if you guys have any.
Yes.
You mentioned like Asset Works and AIM. We have Asset Work, AIM. And can you make some recommendations or suggestions on compatibility between having Revit information going to Asset Works? Is it working, not working, troublesome, worth the effort?
So the question is, are there any recommendations to link data in the Revit model to AIM, right? There is no direct, AIM and Navis and AssetWorks do not have a direct link from Revit to AIM, very similar to Archibus and Maximo. So to do that, you probably, either you can explore things like sending out your data out of Revit into an Excel sheet, and then there are apps that would allow you to link the Excel sheet automatically to AIM, okay? I know some other software like platforms like SAP, where it actually reads the Excel. SAP is another FM system that actually reads the Excel sheet directly. I don't think AIM, I've not talked, does it? It does.
AIM actually has an ETL tool to actually pull in that data from the spreadsheet. It does require some scripting, so your database administrator would need to know that, but they do have a tool.
We use that tool. So it's not a really direct reading of the Excel sheet. Pentaho is really basically it's like a setup. You know how you set up to map one column to another column. So you're mapping the columns and data in Excel to your AIM fields, and Pentaho is the tool that allow you to do that. So it's if you set up your Excel sheet to have a standard format that will be filled that way, and you set up Pentaho to read the Excel sheet into AIM fields, then it's a one-time setup. You have time for another? One more question? Okay.
It's a long question.
Okay, that's fine. We can continue after.
When you're preparing standards and inserting them into some kind of legal document so that someone is responsible for presenting them to you, it can be the design architectural team who would be responsible for the Revit model, or it could be the contractor who is responsible for as-built conditions. Where is do you consider the best place to put these? Who should ultimately be responsible for providing that information?
So the question is, as an owner who has developed their standards, where would you make those, whose responsibility would you make those standards so that they can be responsible, contractually responsible for delivering the data to you, right? I would say my quick answer is whoever has the longest tenure on the project. And so if and again, that goes back to how's your project is conducted. Is it a design build, bid build? Is it a design build? So that could impact the answer. Virginia Tech does CM at risk and design build projects only. And most of those, if not all of those, are contractor led. And so contractors are the one that will be responsible for delivering the data to us. But that's a really good question, because at the end, yes, I'm going to need the subcontractor to deliver data to me, but it's coming through someone who's responsible. It could be a consultant. I mean, as an owner, you may hire a consultant that would be responsible for overseeing the design and construction process, working with those teams, being responsible for not just validating the data, but also collecting it. So there are different formats. I don't have an answer of here's choose A, not B or C. Yeah, thank you very much.